So we're proud to announce that we have Congressman Seth Moulton with us today. He's one of the great leaders in Congress for high-speed rail. We have an interesting story. He reached out to us a number of years ago and said, I want to really help make this happen, and what do we need to do? So we had a nice dinner with a group of people, and that's kind of was the beginning of a lot of this extra stuff we've been doing, and built the coalition and stuff from that. So let's give Seth Moulton a great welcome and help him out.
Andy, thank you very much. Thank you. It's an honor to be here with all of you. And I'll tell you, when you're in a business where you often have to give talks, give speeches, everyone dreads giving the after lunch speech. So it is an honor to be with you here at lunch. And you should not be shy about continuing to eat. I'm going to make my remarks brief so that we can get to your questions. A lot of politicians don't like to take questions because it's a little harder than just giving a canned speech. But I think it's more important. And I really want to hear what you're thinking, what questions are on your mind, and have a dialogue back and forth that hopefully can help advance the cause that we share. But let me just start by saying a couple things. This is Infrastructure Week here in Congress and in Washington, Infrastructure Week. But it's kind of sad that we're in the United States of America and we're at a time in 2024 where we can't really be very proud of our infrastructure. We hear all the time about how our infrastructure is falling apart. The greatest generation came home from World War II and made generational investments in infrastructure, but then the next generation didn't really do anything to renew it or build upon it. And so the infrastructure that we have is falling apart, and we don't have the modern infrastructure that we should have to be the envy of the world. When you go and spend time in other countries, I was recently in Europe, you see the fruits of investments that have been made, not just recently, although there are some remarkable examples of recent investment in high-speed rail, like Spain's high-speed rail program, which has really just unfolded in the last 15 years. It's a testament to what can be done and done quickly if a nation is committed. But you go to a place like France and you see the fruits of investments that have been made literally over decades, when all we were doing in America was adding lanes to highways and failing to maintain the bridges that we had already built. So we have a lot of work to do, but the opportunity for us here, the great opportunity, is to take a leap forward. And while a lot of people will be talking about fixing roads and bridges, high-speed rail is truly about the future. It's about the future for America, not just because it's a better way to get around, but because of what high-speed rail does for our communities. Everyone says they want classic small-town America. They want to be able to walk to local restaurants instead of drive to a strip mall with a whole bunch of chains. Well, the reason we have strip malls and chains is because we all drive cars everywhere we go. You want walkable downtowns, you have to be able to walk. You get walkable downtowns when you have train stations. I'm very lucky to come from a small part of America, the North Shore of Massachusetts, that fended off the expansion of I-95 back in the 1970s. And so we have good rail service and walkable downtowns and a lot of local businesses, not just chains, where all the profits go to investors on Wall Street and not to the communities that they serve. But we don't force that. There are no rules against chain restaurants. We have great downtowns because we have good rail service and everyone is not dependent on a car. That can be the rest of America. And it's not something that we have to force down people's throats. We just want to give people the option. How can you say that I in America have more freedom than a traveler in France when I just don't even have the option to go 200 miles per hour to where I want to get? Because no one's saying I can't drive or can't take a plane. Those options will still be available. But let's give Americans the freedom to choose. Let's give me, when I want to go home to Boston, the freedom to choose to get on a 3-hour train. A train to Boston in 3 hours. And by the way, if you had 3-hour train service, there would be enough traffic that you'd have a train every 15 minutes at least, maybe even every 10. How nice would it be to go down to Union Station and, I missed the 310. I'm going to have to wait for the 320. Imagine being in Spain, where the train's a little late and you get a refund. Can you even imagine getting a refund from United or American Airlines because your flight is a little bit late? That's the reliability that people in the other world have. That's freedom that people in Europe have to choose. Think about Boston to Chicago. I love Boston. I'm from Boston, so I talk a lot about Boston. Think about what Boston to Chicago rail service would mean. It would be great for Chicago. It'd be great for everyone who lives in Boston. But imagine what it would do for all the communities in between. Because we can invest in another runway at Logan or another runway in O'Hare. Everyone knows O'Hare's super congested. But that doesn't do anything for Syracuse or Cleveland or Buffalo or Springfield, Massachusetts. But if you could get from Boston to Chicago in 4 hours, you could get from Springfield, Western Massachusetts, to Boston in 40 minutes, that would be transformative for all those economies in between. Think about the most popular high-speed rail line in the world right now, Beijing to Shanghai. Beijing to Shanghai has decreased regional inequality 25% because of exactly what I'm describing. It's not just good for the endpoints, it's good for the places in between. You know, the distance from Beijing to Shanghai is about the same distance as Chicago to Atlanta. Now, no one in America thinks about high-speed rail between Chicago and Atlanta, but we should. And what a difference that would make for so many states in between that have been left out of the economic revolution that's been so great for cities like Chicago and Atlanta. Think about the Pacific Northwest, where Microsoft helped fund a study that identified spending about $42 billion on building high-speed rail, which I admit is a lot. That's a lot of money. You know, we're struggling to figure out how to pay for this bridge in Baltimore that fell down, and it's going to cost about $1.5 billion. So I admit $42 billion is a lot of money. You know, it's about 2/3 what we're sending to Ukraine. But $355 billion is what you get in return. Any business would make that investment. Any business would make that investment. America should too. And of course, they were smart. They looked at not just what the return on the investment in high-speed rail would be, but they looked at the alternatives. Well, it turns out that you can add a lane to I-5 in either direction for about twice that price. For about $80 billion, you can add one lane to I-5 in either direction. But here's the catch. Traffic will actually get worse, which means speeds will actually be slower, which means economic benefits will be negative. So you invest $42 billion and you get $355 billion benefit, or you invest $80 billion, and although you get some benefit from the jobs building these lanes, after they're built, it actually gets worse. So we just need to bring some common sense, some basic math to the investments that we're making in America. And sometimes, you know, we in Congress get asked to go give a speech to, you know, some group that's got a hard case to make. And this is like a no-brainer. So we just got to figure out how to make this for America. And that's what I'm here to work with you on today. So with that introduction, I'd be delighted to take your questions. Feel free to take it anywhere you'd like.
Any questions in the back there? Hold on. Let me go to the person closer to you. Okay, there we go.
The question?
Right there.
How much do you think needs to be spent to construct dedicated high-speed rail lines that are built to 186 miles per hour? And also, how much can be done to upgrade the Northeast Corridor so that travel time between Boston and Washington would be about under 4 hours rather than just about around 6 right now? And additionally, can improvements be made that without like investing significant financing for the project on the Northeast Corridor? Because there a lot of stuff can be done through changes in organization and operation, and maybe reducing padding as well. It's
Sure,
very
so
technical, but
a bunch of questions in there. Let me take them one at a time. But I'm going to start by disagreeing with one of your premises, which is that 186 miles per hour is a standard developed in the 1960s. We should not be building rail lines to 186 miles per hour, where they should be built to at least 225, and I would argue 250 or more. So that's just, I want to just put my marker down. We're not trying to catch up with the rest of the world here. We should be leading the rest of the world. Look, each of these projects has a different price tag, right? I mean, I just cited the Pacific Northwest, where they had an estimate of $42 billion. Again, that's a lot of money unless you look at what the return is. Part of the job I think that we have to do is figuring out ways that we can better capture that return, right? Because if you knew for sure that you could get all of those $355 billion back to help pay for the project, I mean, any one of us would sign up to build it right away. So how to capture that value, I think, is an important part of this discussion, and that's certainly part of the discussion on the Northeast Corridor. Now, I've been working closely with Amtrak's leadership about their plans to upgrade the corridor, and I'll make a couple comments on this. I think they've had some false starts in the past. They proposed a line on my end of the corridor, the sort of New York to Washington, the New York to Boston section, that upset a bunch of people in Connecticut because they didn't do the alternatives analysis, and they didn't say, hey, if we don't do this, look at what you're going to get for expanding I-95. So there's a big discussion to have about just how we, sell this project. There's a discussion to be had about how we capture the value to help pay for it. And then there are also these operational questions that you mentioned about just sort of the way things go on the Northeast Corridor today. It's kind of insane if you think about it from an operational perspective, that every New Jersey Transit train comes in to Penn Station, unloads its passengers, and then has to be turned around and backed out. Why wouldn't those trains just continue to Long Island? I mean, that's like operations 101, and yet parochial New York politics prevent it from happening. I guess you got to say parochial New York, New Jersey politics. So there are some really just basic common sense changes that could be made operationally on the Northeast Corridor to improve travel times. But I think what the big picture here is you've got to invest in new right-of-way in places like through Connecticut. There's no way around it. But there are also places like New York where you're probably not going to have a dramatically new right-of-way, but you've just got to be a lot smarter about using the infrastructure that we have. One of the things I've really been pushing Amtrak to do is, instead of just making incremental upgrades all over the system, try to focus your money on places where we really can dramatically increase speeds. Because when I get on the Acela, or the next generation Acela, and I'm sitting next to a Republican who's a high-speed rail skeptic, I don't want to tell them, hey, that $10 billion that we passed through the law that you didn't vote for, we've been able to go 10 miles an hour faster because of that. What I want to do is go 80 miles an hour for 30 miles, and then come to a screeching halt and start going 50 and saying, we could have this for the rest of the way. So there's a political dynamic to just how you sell this that I think is important as well. And that all, at the end of the day, comes back to the value of just having one true high-speed rail line in America, which we still don't have. And I think things will get a lot better once we do.
Hi.
Thank you. Really appreciate
This is not my fault. I'm not saying who goes first. So.
I really appreciate the vision that you've brought to this, including about building big and building fast, and talking about the funding bills to do that. As we embark on these corridor identification planning studies, I'm curious how much guidance we can expect from Congress in terms of how to build from the pieces a few hundred miles at a time that we're looking at now into a true national network like what this organization is advocating?
Well, My American High-Speed Rail Act, which, I mean, the headline of this bill is that it would invest, over $200 billion in high-speed rail, but that's really not the important point. What Congress really needs to do is just establish some standards, right? I mean, in a perfect world, what we would do is establish matching funds, just like you have for federal highway projects. I mean, my position all along has been, let's just level the playing field so that if state transportation planners consider investing in high-speed rail, they're going to get the same federal support that they would for a highway project or an airport project, which is obviously not even close to the case today. But there does need to be some just basic guidance from Congress about how to build these systems, what standards to build them to. And I don't think we necessarily need to get all that much more complicated than that. But one of the reasons the interstate highway system has been successful insofar as you can measure its success, or its traditional measures of success, I should say, because I think there's also a really good case the interstate highway system causes us a lot of problems. But putting that aside for a second, having some federal standards, some national standards, just like here are the engineering standards that you're going to have to meet so that people can drive certain speeds on this highway, those are important. And I think that's a role that Congress can play. But at the end of the day, the other thing that's been important for the development of the interstate highway system is that states and localities have been able to drive a lot of this thinking. So when I go to the governor of Massachusetts, who's planning to invest billions of dollars in what we call West-East Rail, which is connecting Springfield and Boston. I mentioned before, Springfield has a stop on a high-speed rail route to Chicago. They're talking about building a 79-mile-per-hour system, the same talk that we would have had in 1905. I think it's a total waste of money. And the ridership studies show that no one's going to ride it. What we should be doing is building high-speed rail. And even if you can't get to Chicago now, we know that when you can, the segment from Boston to Springfield will already be up to standard and you can just connect it and go. This, incidentally, is the approach that France has taken. And I remember my first high-speed rail trip in France was from Paris south to Nice. But the high-speed rail only went so far. I forget exactly where it switched. And then the train just continued on conventional tracks to Nice. So the point is that as they have expanded the high-speed rail network, they've made sure it's all compatible so that you can just go further and further on high-speed rail. I took a high-speed train from Paris to Barcelona recently, a couple years ago. Parts of that line were not high-speed, kind of in between, around the border between France and Spain. But the endpoints into Barcelona and coming out of Paris were high-speed. That's the kind of system that we need to foster here in America. Oh, hot mic. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Congressmember, thank you so much for your support for rail in the U.S. I feel like you are a leading voice, and I've appreciated you for a long time.
Thank you.
I work at Alstom currently, but I was with the administration previously and helped pass the bipartisan infrastructure law, and have been thinking a lot about sort of this orientation towards what are we optimizing for, and watching a lot of how the funding for the Northeast Corridor has gotten complicated. Your remarks about speed and sort of this desire to get to a certain speed, and a lot of the conversation here, and as you can tell, don't necessarily fit in this room, is about achieving a certain speed. But do you think that perhaps some of the planning work that we're doing, perhaps we should be helping people optimize more for time savings, and thinking about how we identify projects and rank projects based on the amount of time that we can save passengers, sort of regardless of some of the other aspects that seem to take priority today?
Sure. No, that's a really great question. And this is, I know, an active sort of academic debate within the field. So I'm very happy to dive into it a little bit myself. Look, at the end of the day, travel time savings are what, ultimately travel time is what is going to convince people to get on a train, right? It doesn't matter if I can get from Washington to Boston in 3 hours going at a top speed of 250 miles per hour, or 3 hours going at a top speed of 180 miles per hour, right? As long as I can get there in that amount of time. But the problem is that there has to be a sort of minimum standard, or we're never going to be able to achieve those travel times in the future, right? So, we can have a debate about exactly what that minimum standard is. But I would argue it's important, as we're making new investments, to make those investments up to a minimum standard. And maybe it's 186. I would argue it should be at least 225. But whatever it is, we might not use that infrastructure to that potential right now, but it will be there for the future. And that's just really important, so that we're not throwing good money after bad. And where this sort of comes into the broader debate about the funding that's coming out of the bipartisan infrastructure law is that you can say, look, we'll take this the Sunset Limited route and find a few places to upgrade from 40 miles per hour to 80 miles per hour and literally save half the time. But at 80 miles per hour, people are still not going to take the train because it's too slow compared to driving, right? So I do think that, again, one of the virtues of these high-speed rail programs that have been really successful in other countries is they have established these minimum engineering standards for high speed. And then as you put the different pieces together, you work on the travel time savings. Apply this to the Northeast Corridor. That means that, yes, we're probably not going to be flying through the East River tunnels at 150 miles per hour, right? But that's okay. Let's make sure that when you get out of that tunnel, we're not putting a whole bunch of, say 50-mile-an-hour turnouts all the way up to, the junction with the New Haven, because we're just not really thinking about the future. And 20 years from now, we're saying, why on earth did we spend $5 million putting in a 50-mile-an-hour turnout when it should have been a 100-mile-an-hour turnout? Very esoteric, but I think everyone in the...
Ramon, it's
Yeah.
a pleasure to have you here, and we really appreciate you joining us on this annual event. And Andy and Ezra and Robert have put together a wonderful group of advocates here. You have national and international leaders. You have business and union leaders here. And we were in our board meeting last night saying, what's next? What do we do? How do we galvanize all of this incredible support to really get behind you and what your vision is? So what's the blocking and tackling you want us to carry forward? Because that was a question posed at the board table last night.
Yeah.
Tell us what would you like us to do as a wonderful group of advocates that see and want your vision to become reality?
Keith, that is such a great question, because as I said at the beginning, this is really about figuring out, how do we make this happen, right? We know this makes sense. How do we sell it to the rest of America and actually make this happen? There's a couple of points. There's a lot to be said about this, but a couple of key points I would make. First of all, I do believe, and international experience backs this up time and time again, it's critical to have one successful high-speed rail line that you can point to in America. We've never had that. We've never had that. I think that it's important to have it in a place that's not already used to having trains. Because if you have that one high-speed rail line be in the Northeast Corridor, there will be a lot of Americans who say, well, yeah, but of course, they're all used to riding trains in the Northeast, that it's going to work there. That doesn't mean that it's going to work in other parts of the country. It's a totally ridiculous argument, but nonetheless, it's something that resonates with people. So I think it's also important to have a really successful high-speed rail line in a part of the country that's not necessarily used to having rail service. It looks today like the first high-speed rail line, true high-speed rail line, will probably be Las Vegas to Los Angeles. Now, that's sort of in between. It's not ideal from a political perspective, but it is a place where people are not used to taking trains today. So I think there's a really good argument there. But what really matters at the end of the day for changing the political conversation in Washington is to have high-speed rail be successful in a red state. And that's why when I look at all the projects across the country, I think Texas is so important. And I know that you're going to have a panel on Texas Central, a name that I chose, little known fact, after mine. But look, if you could suddenly get Republicans from Texas coming to Washington saying, this is great and we should have more of it, that totally changes the funding conversation in Washington from where it is today. Final point on this. It is a waste of money to be investing a whole bunch of bipartisan infrastructure law dollars in 80-mile-an-hour trains. And the legacy of that law can either be that we sprinkle a little bit of incremental improvements across America, and a whole bunch of people said at the end of the day, it didn't really change anything, so it wasn't worth it. Or we can concentrate in a few true high-speed rail corridors, which we know will be successful, and it will start a revolution. That is a choice. I worked hard to try to get dedicated high-speed rail money that could only be used on true high-speed rail into the bipartisan infrastructure law, and I'll be the first to admit, I failed. We did not get that done. But we can influence how the money that is in there for rail is actually spent, and that's the work that we have before us today.